Welcome back to the MizzouToday Show, brought to you by On3 and Rivals. We've already lost someone. Our other co-host, Kyle, has had some connection issues in the past, but we're going to keep going, and we're going to be talking about the NFL Draft this week. And no better person to bring on to talk about the NFL Draft other than Director of Media Partnerships at Pro Football and Sports Network, Jacob Infante, who also contributes to writes about the Bears and the NFL Draft, the Windy City Gridiron, which he's done for a long time at SB Nation. Jacob, welcome in, and Kyle will join us here shortly. We're going to talk about the NFL Draft, and at the top, just of these Mizzou guys, these Mizzou prospects, and one real notable thing about all six guys we're going to be talking about here today regarding Mizzou, all of them were transfers for this Tigers team. All came in through the transfer portal, and one of those guys that really thrived in that role, coming over from Michigan State, is Zion Young. What can you tell us just about Zion and what that ceiling looks like here in the NFL Draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you watch Zion, you saw a player who consistently got better. Looking at his time at Michigan State and then going to 2024 at Mizzou and, this past season as well. You saw just consistent improvement. And I think with him, I mean, he's a big guy, so he's even for an edge rusher, and you see the power and how he can set the edge in the run game. I think he's going to be an impact player against the run pretty quickly in the league with that size, the length, and the raw power, as well as the spatial awareness to be able to work off of blocks and stuff like that, free up his hands and disengage to make the tackle. I think a lot of people talk about, okay, he's not the most flexible, he can't bend incredibly well, but it's like I still think his short area quickness is better than a lot of people realize, at least at the national level. Because I mean, you see flashes too of him, exploding, coming off his stance at the line of scrimmage. And he's got a deep arsenal of moves he can use to win at the point of attack. I think he's a round one player, and it's I don't know. It can be a little tricky. I mean, obviously, with the legal stuff that's pending right now with the DWI, but I think that especially on tape and I don't know. We've seen players go in the first round of the NFL draft for with more concerning situations for sure than what Zion has going on right now. So I think off of the tape and when you factor in the premier positional value, I think he's a round one pick, probably late round one, just because, I think looking at some of the other edge rushers in this class, maybe some guys are, a little bit twitchier, a little bit more flexible, and they're going to make the splash plays against the pass. But I think the NFL is a copycat league, and I think that slowly but surely teams are starting to incorporate the run a little bit more. I think a player like Zion is going to become really, really valuable in that regard very soon.
Building off that, Jacob, I don't want you to spoil any of the mock drafts you're doing or anything that may be behind your Patreon too. What is like the ceiling in the first round for Zion? And I know there's been a lot of other mocks that maybe not just including yours that have him going to the Chicago Bears, a team you cover pretty well for the NFL draft and with prospects. What does that fit look like? And do you think there's a road or a door that opens even sooner than the Bears at 25?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the ceiling, I'm looking at probably 20 to the Dallas Cowboys, honestly. I mean, and a lot of those teams in the 20s, I think could be good fits for an edge rusher. I mean, you're looking at, I mean, obviously the Bears and, given my ties there, and I wore the shirt. I'm a fanboy. Who cares? I have a bias towards, oh, the Bears should take Zion Young at 25. I'd be completely happy with that. But also looking, the Cowboys have a desperate need at edge rusher. I mean, they traded for Rashawn Gary, but he's somebody who hasn't been quite as consistent as you'd like these last couple of years. I think he's much better suited as a rotational guy, as a short-term starting option going forward. So I think to that point, if the Cowboys don't trade up, I know there's some rumblings that might be the case, but if they keep 12 and 20, I think Zion at 20 could make sense. A couple of those other teams too. I mean, he might not be a one-to-one perfect scheme fit for the Chargers, but Khalil Mack's in the tail end of his career. He's only on a 1-year deal. They're going to need another starter alongside Tuli Pelotu, and then Eagles need some edge help. The Buffalo could use some edge help. I mean, you could argue Kansas City as well at 29. So any of those teams in the 20s, I think would make a lot of sense for Zion. I mean, there's a chance he falls into round two. I think it all depends on what are teams' preferred flavor, so to speak, at edge rusher. I mean, maybe if you want a faster guy, then you're going to want to go with like Cassius Howell out of A&M, or maybe R. Mason Thomas out of Oklahoma. But I think if you want a well-rounded edge, more of a power, he could definitely win with finesse for sure. But I think at his size, he's going to be kind of shoehorned into a power type of edge. Uh, if you want someone like that, then you have a lot of potential landing spots somewhere in that 20s kind of range. But I think it starts with Dallas at 20.
It seems like this year's class has a lot of kind of these top end defensive ends, edge rushers. Do you think that's something that helps Zion at kind of that back end of the first round where maybe teams are looking and seeing, a run on the position? Or do you think that's something that could hurt him where teams are saying, well, there's more depth here. We can, look elsewhere or look for a different position that's maybe not as deep in the first round?
So I think that's something that in the late 20s, especially, I think there's going to be a run on edge rushers, and I think that's going to help Zion, if anything. Looking at this class specifically, I think a lot of talented players, obviously at edge, like you mentioned. I mean, at this stage, you could argue for as many as 7, 8 guys going in the first round. I mean, I don't think that many are going to go, but I think there are a lot of players that have like you could make an argument that they could certainly sneak their way into the first round. I think though, with a lot of those late first round teams, a lot of the playoff contenders, they're going to realize there's a pretty considerable drop off, at least in my opinion, between say Zion, your Keldrick Falks, your Gabe Yakis, your TJ Parkers, guys like that. And then, a couple sprinkled in the early second round. And then after that, like after the top 10 or 11 or so, there's a drop for sure. So if you're picking edge rusher in this class, I think it's the same with offensive tackle too. But with edge rusher, I think if you're taking one late round one, you're not getting one late round two. So I think that if you're a team in that kind of situation in need of pass rush, I think it makes a lot of sense to go edge in round one. So I think that could help Zion for sure.
Jacob, I pulled up Pro Football Sports Network, posted this on Monday, recording here on Tuesday. No Zion Young in the first round in your latest mock.
Yeah. So in my most recent one, you're calling me out here. So I didn't have Zion in the first round of my last mock, and part of that I think came down to the same kind of argument where, yeah, I think a lot of edge rushers are going to go late in the first round. But it's also, like I mentioned earlier, different flavors of edge. And look, at the end of the day, I think that he will find his way into late round one. But, I'm trying to pursue different avenues and be like, hey, here's what it could look like if so-and-so goes in the first round instead. Like, I think I have Malachi Lawrence out of UCF sneaking into the first round. I have Zion Young graded higher on my board than Malachi Lawrence, but I think, okay, Lawrence has longer arms. He tested incredibly well at the combine. He's certainly more like less developed on tape, especially against the run, but maybe someone's going to bet on the upside as a pass rusher. So you could go in a lot of different directions with that. I think, at least off of my board, Zion's better than some of those other guys where, like R. Mason Thomas, I mentioned, Lawrence, I mentioned. I have him slightly ahead of Gabe Yakis too, out of Illinois. But yeah, I think it's another one of those things where if someone falls in love with one of those speed guys, or they maybe aren't as sold, they're gonna be sold on the floor with Young for sure. But maybe they see, I want to take a swing at the position. Let's bet on someone who's a little bit more raw, but someone who's toolsy in that regard. It could happen. It could certainly happen. So that's the situation that I kind of wanted to pursue in my latest mock draft. It's going to be interesting for sure, because I think there are a lot of guys who are like right on the fringe there. So I have Young as one of those guys where, I mean, if I were a GM for all 32 teams at once, he'd end up in that top 32. But at the end of the day, I think it could really go, in a bunch of different directions.
Pivoting over to a really good, I mean, football family and football name, and Josiah Trotter, his brother's in the NFL right now. Of course, his father played in the NFL as well. Josiah Trotter seems like the consensus second guy off the board among the Missouri prospects, and I know you would agree with that, Jacob. What do people like so much about Josiah just in 1 year in the SEC after transferring over from West Virginia? And what is that? I mean, what's the highest round that you see him going in? Because some guys have kind of wavered between second, third, and fourth.
Yeah, so for someone who's only a redshirt sophomore, I come away extremely impressed with his game as far as how it translates to the pros. I think he's such a quick processor, especially in the run game. I think he understands, how to execute his run fits well. He takes good angles in pursuit. He's aggressive, getting to the ball. I think he takes blocks head on better than most linebackers in this class. He's physical. He's one of the better blitzing linebackers in this class. The play strength, the motor, the ability to. I mean, obviously, being an off-ball linebacker, the moves, the depth and arsenal of pass rushing moves isn't going to be the same as like an edge rusher or defensive tackle. But I think as far as off-ball guys go, Trotter has one of the deeper bags in this class. So off of that, I mean, you're looking at a reliable tackler, hard hitter, intelligent football player. I think his big concern comes in coverage. And, that's something that, came to bite Mizzou sometimes. I know he allowed passer ratings above 100 in each of his 2 seasons that he played, the one at Mizzou and the one at West Virginia. His change of direction isn't bad, but I still think that he can be a little bit tight in the hips sometimes. And I think that's something that limits his range. Sometimes as a tackler, which is why, I have him as a Mike rather than a Will, where it's a little bit more condensed space. I mean, you're taking advantage of, the intelligence and, putting the dot on him essentially. But uh, I think that the change of direction isn't going to be as good as some other linebackers in this class near the top. Uh, I think as intelligent as he is against the run, I still think he's trying to get a better feel for, playing and dropping back in zone coverage across the middle of the field. And just, the depth of his dropbacks, when to jump on a route, stuff like that. I think that that's something that's going to it's a work in progress in his game for sure. So off of that, he's not, I'm not going to sit here and say he's a first round talent, but I do think that late second, early third is entirely possible for him. As I'm frantically pulling up my board here, I have him ranked as the number 63 overall player on my board. So that's right at the tail end of round two, with the potential to go into round three. But luckily for him, I think that it's a it's a class that's pretty heavy on the top 7 linebackers, with Trotter being one of them. And we talk about drop-offs in this class. There's a good core. I mean, obviously you have your Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese, if you have him as an off-ball. I do in this case. I think he's probably going to play edge, but I think he's better off the ball. And there are a couple other guys, CJ Allen, Jacob Rodriguez, Anthony Hill, Jake Golday, to name those other 6. And then Trotter's in that mix as well. That's your top 7. I feel pretty strongly about that. And it's just a matter of what order that's going to go in. But I think after those guys, you're looking at a little bit of a drop off where it's like, all right, there's starting potential here, but I don't think any of these guys are going to start from day one. Whereas with Trotter and the rest of those other 6 I mentioned, I think you could make that argument. So late second, early third is probably the range for him. I think that he's definitely going to need to get better in coverage to maximize his full potential. But I think that because of how polished he is against the run and what he brings as a blitzing defender right now, I think he can start pretty quickly in the NFL.
We talked about positional value a little bit at defensive end and edge rusher. That's a conversation that comes up with off-ball linebackers a lot. So what do you see as, I guess, the difference maker between a guy who's a second, third round linebacker versus a guy who's, a guy you take a shot on in the 5th or 6th, right? And ends up being a reliable guy in the league for a while. What do you see as kind of making the difference there for off-ball linebackers?
Yeah, no, I think that it can it definitely varies where if you're looking in that fourth, fifth round range, it's usually a decent mix of raw athletes at linebacker and your high floor, low ceiling special teams core guys. And, those are usually the ones who, get the most tackles in college football where, they're processing at a quicker speed than everybody else, but they're not super athletic. They don't have great size. They don't bring much value on passing downs. And I think where Trotter separates himself is compared to one of those, lower end, high floor type of guys. I think Trotter in a straight line is faster than that type of prospect. And I also think that his value on passing downs comes as a blitzer. I mean, he has the coverage concerns, but I think that the tenacity, the refinement, and the instincts that he brings rushing the passer, I think is a difference maker for him that kind of elevates him from that next level. And you go the other way around with some of those other linebackers who get picked, where all right, they're physical freaks of nature. Maybe they run incredibly fast, or they have good size adjusted athleticism, where it's above average speed for tremendous size, but they don't have the feel for the game that Trotter has. They don't sift through blocks. They don't have that patience to let the play unfold and then understand which gap to exploit, how to break down properly, and then make the tackle. So I think around that range, you can really get two different types of linebackers. I think Trotter has more. I think he's got more physical tools, and he has that blitzing element that kind of separates him from the rest of the bunch there. Uh, and I think as far as some of the projects that get taken around that range, I think that Trotter is just way more NFL ready than any of those guys. So I think that's kind of the separation from him specifically, to two of the different types of linebackers that kind of go in that range.
Moving on to the defensive tackle position, guy in Chris McClellan, who's been mocked pretty high as well. In that second round is probably the max is his ceiling, and then you've seen him kind of fall to third and fourth. And the Bears have popped up at times too. What stands out so much about Chris McClellan? Because from our perspective, he was a guy that could throw his arm up pretty easily and bat down a pass. He was pretty quick too. We saw that at the combine. What do you like so much about Chris McClellan?
So I definitely like the side speed element of it. I think for such a big dude with those long arms and those big hands, I mean, that definitely helps him out where you can see when he gets his hands right, when he lands his strikes accurately, having such long arms, he does a good job of keeping offensive linemen at bay. And, with such a big reach, it's really difficult for guys to get their hands inside his chest and control him at the point of attack. And I think it helps that he's got good grip strength too. Like he can stand his ground well working through blocks. Like you said, he performed really well at the combine. I mean, for a guy who's that big to, fire off the ball the way that he does, it's really impressive. And I know a lot of people talk about like some of the other size speed guys, like, Caleb Banks out of Florida or Lee Hunter out of Texas Tech. Like I think Chris McClellan isn't too far behind those guys, at least as far as athleticism goes for that size. I mean, I came away really impressed with his burst in a vacuum for sure, when I watched him on tape. And I've seen some flashes of pad level with him. I think it's definitely inconsistent. And that's something that can affect him because, if you're not getting your weight underneath him, uh, it's tough to maximize that, to win with that leverage, tough to maximize the power in the lower half. Uh, and that can come back to bite McClellan sometimes, but he's also so big that he can get away with it at times in college. So yeah, that's something he'll need to definitely hone in on in the NFL. Uh, I think deepening his arsenal as a pass rusher, it should be a priority for him. Where it may be a little one dimensional. Winning heavily with power. I think if he can do a better job of adding some more moves, relying, executing the cross chop a little bit, throwing in a swim or a rip or something like that, I think would go a long way. just to have like a consistent counter move strategy, I think is something that he'll need to get better at. But we've seen a lot of defensive linemen be able to do that, where they have the physical tools, but with NFL coaching, they can, it can become second nature to kind of add those moves. So as I'm preparing to sneeze, there you go. There you go. I was really worried I was gonna stop the show to sneeze, and I'm like, just totally do it for nothing. So thank God. But no, anyway, before the sneeze monster came to get me, I think the third round would be a good fit for McClellan. I have him as a top 100 player on my board. So, by default with, throwing in the comp picks, there are, exactly 100 picks in the first 3 rounds. And you factor in the positional value of defensive tackle. I think that, McClellan should pretty comfortably be in the third round. Second round might be a little bit rich for me. Especially if you have guys like, like I mentioned, Lee Hunter, Caleb Banks, or Kristen Miller out of Georgia too. If you have guys like that falling into the second round, I think that's going to naturally knock that next tier of guys down, like like Grayson Holton out of Oklahoma, Dominique Orange out of Iowa State, Caleb Proctor out of Southeastern Louisiana. Deep pull, but he's going to be really good in the NFL. I've watched way more Southeastern Louisiana football in the last couple of years than I care to admit. But anyway, McClellan, I think I nobody cares about that. McClellan, I do think round 3 probably makes the most sense for him. I think he'll be a solid rotational guy right out of the gate. He definitely has starting potential. I don't think it's going to come in year 1, but I think year 2, year 3, you could start to see him make that leap.
Kyle, before I throw it over to you, we're going to just do a quick read from our sponsors over at Roback, and then we'll get in some quick hitters and anything else you have left on Chris McClellan as well, Kyle. Roback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Roback: best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Roback, they're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable active wear. Roback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite, with novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs for some of your favorite schools. It's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of active wear. Roback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Roback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. Use the code MizzouToday on Roback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of this week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with code MIZ20. Got the Roback on today. So does Kyle. First time I've worn it in a while, but always good to rep the sponsor. Jacob, I think Kyle has one more question on Chris McClellan before we get into some quick hits and some other guys that could be taken.
Yeah, just from covering the team the last couple of years, it seems my read of the situation was always that I thought McClellan was a little bit undervalued within the group, but has had a pretty quick rise here kind of at the end of this past season and then through this off-season process. So what have you seen that has led to this rise for him? And, do you think it was a little bit of an undervaluing before and, getting to the right spot now? Or maybe like one of those guys who's just rising off the field, through the process in a way that doesn't happen as much during the season?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think you definitely saw the growth with him this year. I think 2025 was definitely his best season. You saw some flashes in 2024 as well, but I think that he was able to build off that and kind of take those raw tools and convert it a little bit more to production and disruption. I do think that the pre-draft process has helped, and testing as well as he did certainly was beneficial. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think that for some reason, there are a lot of Mizzou players who tend to rise late in the process for whatever reason. Like I know Armand Membu wasn't seen as a consensus top 10 pick until, after the season. Darius Robinson wasn't seen as a potential first round pick until after the season. You see a lot of guys in the program for whatever reason rising up boards. So I think that McClellan kind of fits that mold as well. I mean, maybe not to the same extent as those guys. I don't think he's going to go round one, but I do think that a lot of it can be, hey, we're finally making a way around to, this player or this school in general. And they say, oh, this McClellan guy's got some tools to work with. So, I mean, he's someone who's been on my radar in some capacity, since probably midway through his 2024 season. But 2025, I think he really helped himself out. And then I think the way that he tested at the combine certainly helped him out as well and kind of opened some eyes to some, if there are some scouts or some coaches or evaluators where they hadn't watched him or they hadn't watched him in depth and then they got around to it and it's like, all right, there's something there now.
Now, kind of moving on to some guys that we'll see most likely get drafted, but maybe in these later rounds, possibly even day 3. And the first name that jumps off the page is a guy like Coleman Jr., who didn't have the best quarterback play for himself, especially down the stretch in SEC play and into the end of the season. Still working with a freshman at the time in Matt Zollers. What do you make of a guy like Coleman when the production, in the numbers and the box score might not be the highest per game just because of, the lack of, complete quarterback play? What do you take from his game, especially just even looking back at his years before that at Mississippi State or even Louisville?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely a guy who is impacted by poor quarterback play, and that's something that I try not to knock him too much for. I mean, I have a production, value that goes into my formula for how I grade wide receivers, but I think if you have the athleticism, if you have the separation ability, that's something you can overcome and you still put out a good grade, even if your numbers aren't insane. I think Coleman to me, I mean, obviously he's a skinnier guy, not the most physical at the catch point or anything like that, but super reliable hands. I mean, at the over the course of his career, his drop grade was only 3.4%. So that's certainly on the higher end for wide receivers in this class. Where he's just consistently able to make grabs over the course of his 4 years, and especially here at Mizzou. Uh, I like the punt return ability that he has. I know he had a touchdown for Mizzou this past year. You can see the twitchiness as a ball carrier and some of the vision that he has, both in condensed spaces, but also like as a returner, that full field vision to be able to make cuts and change direction and stuff like that. Uh, Good breakaway speed once he gets the ball in his hands, but I'm really intrigued by his shiftiness as a route runner. Where okay, sure, he maybe didn't have the deepest route tree at Mizzou, but you see the way that he accelerates when he changes direction, the way he explodes coming out of his breaks, and what he's shown as far as how he can sell those route concepts and keep the defensive backs guessing. I think that there's a lot of potential there. Uh, Obviously, for a guy who's moved around, pretty consistently at the collegiate level, a new school every single year, there's, a little bit. Now, I don't think there's as much worry with that now in the NIL era as there would have been maybe 10 years ago. But, I will say I give him credit for being able to contribute to some extent without having that lengthy amount of time to develop chemistry with a quarterback and to be learning a new playbook every single year. I think that's, there's something that needs to be said about that as well. So, uh, Coleman, I have him as like an early day 3 type of guy. Uh, my overall rating, I have him at, where is he? 152. So 152, that's an early 5th round pick. I think 4th round is entirely reasonable for him as well. Just because, you factor in there is that production piece. He's a smaller guy, not the most physical. Uh, so not only do you have someone who, realistically, I mean, he's got good ball skills, but I don't think he's going to win above the rim in those 50-50 ball kind of situations in the NFL. Uh, but teams aren't going to ask him to do that. So I think just, stick with his strengths, kind of ignore his weaknesses or scheme around it. I think that he's someone who could be a sneaky good, solid slot receiver at the next level. I think a wide receiver 3 in an NFL offense is probably his ceiling. I think he'll start off as a backup, but there's potential for him to sneak into kind of a starting role at the next level.
You mentioned punt returns there a little bit. When you've got a guy who's a bit undersized and maybe looking at a backup role to begin, how much value does that add for Coleman that you could reliably throw him in as a punt returner and extract some value from the pick that way, even if he's not providing it in the main receiver core right at the start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely helpful. And you take a look at, some of the other receivers that might be available round 4, round 5. Most of them weren't primary punt returners at the collegiate level. So I think that having that special teams experience is definitely something that can separate you from the pack as a mid-round, late-round wide receiver. And I think that's something that's going to play in Coleman's favor when it comes time to draft him because, like you said, if you're taking a receiver on day 3, you're not expecting them to be starters right away, realistically. I mean, otherwise you would have taken them earlier. But I think that if you can find, like, if you take him in the 4th round or the 5th round, if you get a nice backup receiver who can return punts, that's good value in that range. Whereas if you take a different receiver around that range and they don't have the special teams value that Coleman does, and it's like, oh, well, we just have a backup receiver. Like, it's like, it could be worse, but to have that extra element of this is how I can contribute and help the team, I think that goes a long way.
But moving on to a guy that made himself probably a good amount of money at the NFL Combine and probably boosted his value as well as being the fastest cornerback and defensive back in the 40-yard dash, and Toriano Pride Jr. Jacob, I believe you told me that when you interviewed Josiah Trotter, and we should have mentioned that you did interview, you've spoken to Josiah Trotter about the draft process. I think
Yeah.
he pointed out as Toriano Pride is someone don't sleep on, that this guy is a legitimate NFL draft prospect. Yes, he didn't have the best junior season at Missouri. The end of his senior season, and Kyle and we sound like a broken record. We bring it up so often, and he did play a lot better throughout that year. What stands out so much about just the physical tools and just the measurements of Toriano Pride Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Trotter was definitely complimentary of Pride, and for good reason. He's somebody who I didn't get around to watching him until like right before the combine, and obviously you watch him, live as a Mizzou fan and stuff like that, and you can kind of get a sense of what he can do. But especially at corner, you're watching the game live, you're watching from the broadcast angle. It could be a little bit tougher to see what he's doing on a down by down basis. So once I got around to that, I was kind of impressed to where it's like, sure, he has his, he has limitations, obviously, but I don't know why he's not being talked about more. And then, I loved the athleticism that he showed at the combine. I thought he was going to run well, but he surpassed even my expectations. Where, I mean, just looking at the numbers this past year, 53.4 passer rating that he allowed when he was targeted, very good marks. The career completion percentage he's allowed is only 55.9%. You take a look at, especially in college, so many quarterbacks are completing over 65% of their passes. To only allow, just under 56% of targets is really, really strong. And he only missed 6.5% of his tackles in 2025, which, especially a defensive back, you see so many guys who they're either incapable or they're unwilling to make tackles out in space. I think Pride does a really good job of that, even being smaller. I like the downhill quickness he has coming out of his breaks is strong. I think he shows good competitiveness, good urgency, competing, at the catch point, competing, charging downhill to attack as a run defender or as a defender after the catch as well. I think he's sharp in man coverage. He can cover underneath as well. Uh, he's an outside corner, but I think he's going to have to kick inside of the nickel just because he doesn't have great size or length. That's something we saw sometimes where, he's a limited catch radius, like a lighter frame. So you shouldn't be expecting him to succeed against in press coverage at the next level just because you're going to get bigger receivers who have, they're taller, they're stronger, they have longer arms, and they're more refined than what you see at the collegiate level. So I think Pride, that'd be something where if he does stick outside, I think that'd be a weakness of his. Uh, I think his form and effort as a tackler are definitely there, but just because he's a smaller guy, I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes raw strength just wins out when you're locked up with a guy. So I think that's something that can potentially impact him at the next level. I want to see a little bit more consistency with him covering vertical route concepts. And that's where I think in the nickel, you're not going to see as much of. Just typically, I mean, usually you think, oh, they're going to run a go concept or they're going to run a deep crosser or something like that. Usually that comes outside, that comes outside along the boundary of the field side. I mean, you're definitely still going to defend vertical route concepts out of the slot, but to me, that's usually a little bit more of, all right, short area burst wins out over long speed. And, Pride obviously, ran incredibly well at the combine, but I think there are some instances where crafty receivers can exploit the leverage points against him in vertical route concepts, and he doesn't know how to fully maximize that yet, at least to me, to where, you know, Pride has the raw athleticism for sure, but say a receiver slowly works their stems, they're, drifting their patterns slightly to the left, and then they have a sudden cut to the right side working across the corner's body. I think that's something where Pride can be a tad bit slow to react sometimes, and as fast as he is, sometimes that can throw him off guard. But overall, though, I think that he's good instincts and coverage, especially underneath. Tested incredibly well at the combine, like you guys said. The second half of the year was really strong, in my opinion. Had some ups and downs along the way between that and his time at Clemson. But I think he's someone where I'd be willing to use a day 3 pick on him. I feel like the consensus is they're pretty quiet on him, honestly. I think compared to where he should be. I think round 6, maybe round 7 would work out well for him, given some of the size limitations that he has. Uh, I know, just working off the consensus, it seems like he is seventh rounder, undrafted free agent. But if he goes in round 6 or something like that, I wouldn't be totally stunned either.
Uh, you mentioned in there a couple times he's a little undersized for the position, especially as corners gotten a bit taller across the past decade or so. Um, and maybe a little overlooked just off of the performance on the field. So how important do you think it was, or how much of a difference does it make going from, whether he's taken in that kind of 6th, 7th round range or ends up as a UDFA? How much of a difference do you think it made for him to go to the combine and show that he's got at least one physical trait that is, elite within the position, within the class, and show that, maybe you can overlook some of the other stuff about him, but he's got this one trait that is at the very least elite within the group that you're picking around him.
Yeah, I mean, the saying goes that speed kills. I mean, they usually say that for offense, but I think it's true on defense as well, where the faster you are, especially if you maximize it with high effort, you can fly to the ball, you can make tackles, you can make plays on the ball. It's easier to be a disruptor the faster you are. So I think that Pride running as well as he did was definitely a huge definitely he was a big benefactor of that. So obviously we talk about, the size. There's some limitations there, obviously, but I think, like you said, to be able to point to in testing, having that elite category, that elite performance, especially in something like the 40-yard dash, where it's definitely more valuable for a cornerback than say something like a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman, where you're running a lot more at corner. You're more likely to sprint for 40 yards as a corner than you are to sprint for 40 yards as an offensive lineman. So to show that speed and to show that level of athleticism, I think really went a long way, especially for a guy who didn't have a ton of buzz going into the combine. I think a lot more people, if they didn't know about him, he definitely put himself on the radar coming out of Indy there.
Last guy that we know will most likely be drafted among this Missouri group is Keagen Trost. And talk about another guy that's been around the block. Started his college career in 2019 at Morgan State, transferred to Indiana State for 4 years, only playing in 3 of those due to the 2020 season being canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He went to Wake Forest this past year, or in 2024. And, I think they were just like, oh, the grades don't really jump off the page at you. And then he comes over to Mizzou and is one of the best, offensive tackles the Tigers have had on that right side. He was the perfect guy to replace Armand Membu in that sense of being a third-team AP All-American. He was first-team All-SEC. He stacked up the accolades. Looking like a guy that'll still be drafted. Jacob, what stands out about Keagen Trost? And once he gets to the NFL too, what do you feel like that role looks like, especially early on?
Yeah, so if I'm going to do a quick reference to PFSN, our player offensive line impact from this past year. We graded 753 offensive linemen at the FBS level. Keagen Trost was number 1 out of all of those guys by a considerable margin. And that's not, not like NFL draft level, but as far as like performance in college, Trost was by far the best. And, that's something, we've been doing the last 2 years now. So it's a little bit newer, but so far he has the top overall grade over, looking at over 1,500 offensive linemen from 2024 and 2025. Trost has the best grade, literally almost broke our scale at 99.9. He was that good this year for Mizzou. So that literally, I mean, you talk about a perfect replacement for Armand Membu. I know that was a concern going into the season. Trost, absolutely lived up to that, and he's not going to be drafted as high as Membu just because, all right, he doesn't have the same length or freakish size or athleticism or anything like that. But I think that he's a really refined player. And I mean, I have him kicking inside to guard at the next level just because I don't think he has the physical requisites to be able to stick at tackle full time. I mean, he could, but I think he's going to be better suited at guard. I love the coordination and the body control that he plays with, to where maybe he's not the fastest guy coming off the line of scrimmage. Maybe he's not going to wow you with how well he changes direction in pass protection and space as a tackle. But I think, especially, as a down blocker, as a reach blocker in the run game, he does a good job. He lands his strikes accurately. He can, roll his hips through contact to seal off defenders and create running lanes for his teammates. I think he processes well in pass protection against blitzes, exotic rushes, stunts, things of that nature. Uh, I think that he's got good play strength as well. You see some plays on tape where he's willing and capable of driving guys off the line of scrimmage. You have a few instances of him. I know against Alabama in particular, I had in my notes where I came in way impressed by his nastiness, but there are a couple other games too this past year at Mizzou where I'm like, all right, he's got a little bit of a mean streak in him, which, you love in an offensive lineman. So I think the intelligence in his processing and pass protection, his processing as a zone run blocker, uh, how he uses his hands, the coordination and how he moves, all at a very high level. I mean, like I mentioned, I mean, he's an older prospect, obviously. He's a 7th-year senior, so I think that'll be something that kind of scares off teams to an extent. Like, that's why I don't think he's not going to go in like the first 2 rounds or anything like that. But I think 4th and 5th round is perfectly acceptable for him. If he goes in the 3rd round, even, I'll be like, all right, I can see it, because the tape is really, really good. And where, maybe the profile, like I say off the field, and people usually assume like that, like, oh, he's, gotten in trouble with the law or something like that. That's not the case with Trost. The off the field with him is just the fact, okay, he's an older prospect, and that's something where, okay, maybe he doesn't have as much perceived upside at the next level, and, he's not the flashiest athlete. He doesn't have the longest arms. That's something that might come back to bite him against bigger and longer NFL defenders. Uh, but even if he doesn't have like those elite top-notch physical traits, I think he's someone who's going to contribute really well He projects as having good versatility too. I mean, if you kick him inside to guard, knowing that he can play tackle, I think is going to be really beneficial for him and NFL teams as well. So I think he'd probably be a backup to start year one, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does turn into a starter eventually.
Yeah, this is something that Keagen brought up himself at Pro Day when all the media were asking him, about conversations with teams, and he said a lot of teams were telling him that they were impressed by how he handled taking multiple stops along the way, and like you mentioned, already an older guy, went what 4 different schools across 7 years, but kind of the, having on tape some amount of success within different systems, within different teams, working with different groups of offensive linemen. How much do you think, and I'm sure this is something that will just continue happening more and more as the portal continues to grow, but how much do you think that helps in teams' evaluations of him to say, like, okay, he can operate both in like Wake Forest's more zone-based, like kind of take up space system, and Mizzou's more outside zone attacking system, having that mix on tape?
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that I think a lot more people are starting to view as a strength, compared to a weakness, like I said, maybe 10 years ago. So that's a very good point in that the versatility of the schemes that he's worked in definitely plays in his advantage. There's a player I talked to, Sam Brunfield, a linebacker from Memphis. He's looking to go to the draft right now as well. He, also kind of bounced around a little bit. Like he played JUCO. He was at Middle Tennessee State, Virginia Tech, and then went to Memphis as well. So another guy, he's played at 4 different schools, exactly like Trost did. And he was able to explain, it's like, all right, I see this as a strength because it shows that I can learn a new playbook quickly. I can contribute after learning a new playbook quickly. And, there's still going to be some prospects where, they've spent the entire time of their collegiate career, 3 years, 4 years, maybe more in some cases, uh, at the same program, in the same playbook, and they've had that comfortability to understand their assignments. Someone like Trost necessarily, hasn't been the case, and he's still been able to perform well. He's still really battle tested. I mean, between Indiana State, Wake Forest, and Mizzou, you're looking at a 4-year starter at the collegiate level. And I know he redshirted at Morgan State as well, but he's had a lot of starting reps, and that shows to me in his intelligence and how refined he is as a blocker. And then, yeah, obviously the ability to learn different playbooks and thrive in different schemes, I think really helps him out too.
Jacob, last question here from us. You brought up before we got on here that Marcus Bryant, someone you weren't really expecting to be drafted in 2025, went in the 7th round to the Patriots. And I think that was a surprise for a lot of people. Once you get to the 7th round, you're like just looking for your team, not necessarily expecting, anyone else from Mizzou. And when I say your team, the NFL team you're probably most looking forward to in the draft. Is there a guy on the Mizzou side right now that you think could be in that same camp where someone could be drafted from Mizzou that we didn't mention earlier?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the guys we talked about for sure definitely are the most likely to make it in. I think Khalil Jacobs, the linebacker, is probably the next best option to where, I mean, yeah, he's undersized at linebacker, but super explosive, jumping at his pro day, 40-inch vertical jump, 11'1" broad jump is nuts for any position, let alone a linebacker. I think he's someone where, obviously the size can be a little bit of a concern, him being like 6'1", under 230 pounds. I like the explosiveness though. Even, his 40-yard dash was just okay, but you can see, that the effort that he plays with and, the quick processing speed. I think he does a good job of maximizing what he has with, okay, it's a run or it's a pass. Now being able to identify this is my assignment, and then identifying from down and distance, identifying from formation. This is the concept that they're going to be running here, and then knowing within that concept that he's seeing, this is what I got to do, and then being able to execute on it and act on it quickly. So I think the mental piece is there with Jacobs. I think the special teams experience is going to help out as well. Uh, yeah, definitely the size is a little bit of a weakness. I don't think he's the most physical taking blocks head on. But he's someone I could see sneaking into day three. Dalen Carnell as well, I think, is somebody that has a chance. I mean, I don't know. I'm almost a little surprised that he just hasn't gotten much buzz at all as a draft prospect. I mean, you're looking at a guy, he has the versatility that you want in a defensive back. You see so many guys in this class like Dylan Thieneman in the first round, Traden Stukes in the second round, Jalen Kilgore in the third round, all these safeties who they can play in the box, they can play in the slot, they can play up high, single high, two high, underneath, center fielder, like everywhere. And they're getting high looks. Carnell, I don't think is as explosive as those guys, but he's a big dude. He's physical. He's a hard hitter. I mean, he's somebody who can make plays on the ball, as we've seen over the course of his collegiate level, or his collegiate career, rather. 4-year major contributor at the SEC level. I think, that's got to count for something. So Carnell, I think the intelligence to be able to play in all those different alignments and to understand his assignment, I think is, it says a lot about his football IQ and his motor, where even if he isn't the most explosive laterally, being a taller safety, it's, it can be tougher for him to sink his hips, get low and change direction suddenly like that. But I think, the hard hitting, the special teams upside with that size and physicality and the versatility. If he gets drafted in round 7, I'd be totally okay with that from a value perspective. I don't know if it'll happen just because he hasn't been talked about that much, but he's somebody I think at least deserves a shot with the team.
Jacob, that's going to do it for us. And thank you for sticking around for so long to talk about Mizzou prospects in the NFL draft. What do you got going on this week with the NFL draft approaching, first round on Thursday? What shows do you have coming up, and where can the people find your Patreon and all your coverage as well?
Yeah, so I've got a couple things planned here in these next couple days before the draft. Got a couple articles finishing up. Bears related, I'm breaking down all their top 30 visits, analyzing each one of those players, sharing my notes on all of them. I've got another article with, some more draft interviews and stuff that I'm publishing last minute. And Thursday with PFSN, we're doing a live NFL draft show over the course of all 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We're all getting together and we're breaking down all 257 picks. I know there's sometimes people complain, especially on day 3. It's like these guys, they're not even talking about the picks anymore. They're just talking about, the same 4 or 5 selections from round 1 and just, sticking to that. And we're breaking down every single one. We've got some, especially in round 1, we've got some challenges along the way that we're going to be doing. So we're going to, me and my co-partner, Ian Cummings on the show. We're going to be, debating each pick, and our host Cam Meller is going to be picking from our list of consequences. Whoever loses the debate, we have a few. I don't want to spoil anything, but we have a couple that are, that could really ruin the night for me if I lose those debates. So at least one of us is guaranteed to go through a table. So that's the only one that for the Buffalo pick, we got a like a plastic table rented out. So somebody's going through it on Thursday. But yeah, we got a couple other things planned, and we're just, we got some guests lined up to talk NFL draft on day 3 as well. So it's gonna be in depth, but it's also gonna be a lot of fun. So check that out for sure. And then you guys can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Infante 24.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jacob. Always a pleasure talking with you, and I'll probably talk to you later today too as well. But just like as Jacob mentioned, follow him on X. He talks more than just football too. He's kind of a comedian in a sense as well. At Jacob Infante 24. Yeah, I'm just don't blush. I'm giving you just letting people know before they follow you that you post more about than just football, the NFL draft. Jacob, thank you for joining us this week. If you're not already subscribed to Mizzou Today, it is still 50% off indefinitely. We don't have an end date right now. So if you'd like to come over, jump on the message board, hang out, read some premium stories from the national site as well, it is 50% off at MizzouToday.com. Thank you guys for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week, most likely talking more about the NFL draft or the transfer portal with Mizzou men's basketball.